Well, Ms. Lord, thank you so much for joining our class today. Our students, they really care about the intersection of technology and national security, and they want to get involved. And you've just been quite a role model for all of them and an inspiration for them to aspire to public service. And I really appreciate your remarks and the chance to ask you some questions.
Great, Joe. Really looking forward to it. So let's get going. I'm really delighted to be able to talk with you and your students at Stanford about some of the progress I believe we're making to modernize our defense acquisition system. Everything we do here at the department is under the framework of our National Defense Strategy, or NDS. And I was really pleased to learn that you already have some familiarity with NDS through the coursework at Stanford. So ANS, Acquisition and Sustainment, remains focused on supporting all three lines of the National Defense Strategy. So they are: 1, restoring military readiness as we build a more lethal force; 2, expanding and strengthening alliances and partnerships; and 3, bringing business reform to the Department of Defense. So under the first line of effort, lethality, our organization is focused on addressing issues we're seeing around supply chain fragility. The nature of today's near-peer or peer-to-peer threat is not always kinetic. One of the ways our adversaries try to gain the advantage is by attacking our supply chain through methods like fraud, introduction of counterfeit materials, control of raw materials, cyber and intellectual property attacks, denying access to strategic materials and rare earth minerals, and finding ways basically to undermine our free market system. The United States is reliant on a global supply chain for our goods, systems, and services. In most instances, this is really very positive. We're enriched by investments from other countries, which often help to build infrastructure that supports a variety of industries. However, we really need to remain vigilant about reliance on adversarial countries when it comes to our defense industrial base and our national security systems. Should our adversaries choose to restrict supplies, it's really possible that the department would struggle to find, test, and qualify replacement sources if they even exist. So the DoD's report that we wrote in response to Executive Order 13806, the report came out in 2018, highlighted reliance on foreign suppliers, including China, for critical materials such as rare earth elements and microelectronics. For example, China has an 80% market share in rare earth elements, as well as a significant market share in manufacturing value-added rare earth-containing goods, such as electric motors and consumer electronics. Rare earth elements are integral to the U.S. military and to the national infrastructure and economy. They're used in a wide variety of applications, ranging from guidance systems for missiles and space launch vehicles to electric vehicles and sophisticated medical instrumentation. ANS is really executing a strategy to bring rare earth element capability back to the U.S. It's multi-pronged and it involves a variety of things: reestablishing domestic processing capability where it's practical and sustainable. There's already sufficient U.S. mining capability, but it's that processing we need. We're collaborating with allies, including a Japanese-funded Australian mining firm, and we're looking at stockpiling. So a key part of the strategy involves promoting U.S. commercial consumption of non-Chinese materials and goods to sustain the U.S. rare earth element capability once it's established. While the U.S. continues to serve as the leader in microelectronics research and development, our domestic capacity in manufacturing, packaging, and testing for microelectronics continues to be in a state of decline. 75% of microelectronics manufacturing and 98% of packaging and testing is now performed in Asia. Rapid growth in global commercial microelectronics markets and the substantial reliance on offshore semiconductor manufacturing, packaging, and testing strains DoD's ability to acquire and sustain microelectronic components embedded in systems critical to national defense. ANS, in conjunction with DoD's research and engineering team, as well as the services, is working to develop a microelectronic strategy to ensure currently fielded, as well as future DoD systems, have domestically produced secure components. The strategy requires different business concepts, potentially public-private partnerships that would allow DoD to leverage commercial market advancements and demand in order to reshore microelectronics production and testing. We continue to actively strengthen our partnerships across industry to advance our modernization efforts and field critical systems and equipment more quickly and effectively. We do this by improving exportability, releasability, market space, interoperability, and industrial capacity. In conjunction with my international cooperation as well as acquisition teams, and in accordance with the second line of effort in the NDS, strengthening alliances, we're actively working to better harness defense trade as a strategic tool to advance national security interests. We are tracking 37 initiatives across DoD focused on 4 main areas: designing in exportability early in programs, facilitating technical releasability, capturing market space versus Russia, for instance, and increasing industrial capacity. In addition to strengthening our interoperability with allies and partners, reforms in each of these areas will strengthen the foreign military sales process. It will enhance the defense industrial base's global competitiveness, and it will increase our supply chain export capability. As we move into fiscal year 2021, an effort we call Defense Trade Modernization will help implement both DoD as well as interagency process to streamline and allow the U.S. to more rapidly export technology in order to drive this interoperability, because we don't fight alone when we fight, as well as to sustain our domestic industrial base. So in support of the NDS's third line of effort, reform, our organization is committed to enabling an acquisition environment designed to deliver warfighting capability at the speed of relevance versus one that's defined by bureaucracy. One of my team's most significant accomplishments has been rewriting what we call the 5000 series, the overarching policy on DoD acquisition that focuses on what I call creative compliance, so that acquisition professionals can design acquisition strategies that minimize risk. The 5000 rewrite achieves that objective by decomposing a large policy document into 6 clear and separate pathways that we call the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, or AAF. Each pathway is tailored to the unique characteristics of the capability being acquired. The 6 pathways include urgent capability acquisition, middle tier of acquisition, major capability acquisition, software acquisition, defense business systems, and acquisition of services. The software acquisition pathway is the newest pathway in the Adaptive Acquisition Framework. Given that software is central to every major DoD mission and system, we need to acquire and deliver software with much greater speed, agility, and cybersecurity. The software pathways built on commercial principles that really enable innovation and rapid delivery in response to conditions of uncertainty. We have rapidly changing user needs, we've got disruptive technologies and threats on the battlefield. The policy tailors as well as streamlines acquisition and requirements processes, reviews, and documents to adopt a modern development practice like Agile and DevOps or DevSecOps. It's a substantial departure from the department's usual way of doing business by removing procedural bottlenecks and regulatory bureaucracy. Programs are really pushed to embrace the goal of delivering capabilities on a much faster cycle time in 1 year or less, while emphasizing and ensuring cybersecurity. In addition to separate policies for each of the AAF's pathways, the overarching acquisition policy rewrite includes DoD instructions for core functional areas. One of the subordinate functional areas I'd like to really focus on today is cybersecurity, which is a foundational aspect of any acquisition that cannot be traded for cost, schedule, or performance. To ensure cybersecurity is also foundational for our partners in industry, the department created the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which we call CMMC. It's scalable, auditable, and repeatable, a cybersecurity standard that industry partners will be required to obtain depending on the level of cybersecurity required in a specific contract. This morning, the Cybersecurity Model Certification, DFARS rule, and we live by the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Standards, was posted on the U.S. Federal Registry as an interim rule. The public's going to be able to comment on the rule for 60 days, and then at the end of the 60-day period, the rule will go into effect. Therefore, it will require all DoD contracts by October 21, 2025, a 5-year span, to have some level of CMMC. Now, I think of this as we think of ISO to quality, the same kind of idea. So, changing topics here a bit, in response to the invocation of the Defense Production Act, or DPA, the department launched a pilot program with commercial risk management tools. The one we use is called Exeger, DDIQ, to really assist with rapidly identifying reputable vendors and vetting the sources of their supplies. We need to know who is in our supply chain, who the beneficial owner is, not just that we're dealing with a shell company. So this tool is fed into our department's Advana Analytics platform, and we're able to provide supply chain illumination that is now essential to the department's execution of all of its Defense Production Act authorities to be able to make sure we increase capacity and throughputs in our supply chain, to make sure that we not only help the Department of Defense, but we work with all of our partners to acquire vital personal protective equipment and medical supplies in response to COVID-19. Our enhanced understanding and rapid vetting of the supply chain has helped mitigate the award of fraudulent contracts to opportunists, and there are many, many out there, ensuring the effective use of the CARES Act funding we've received from Congress. So modernizing our training to allow our workforce to understand how to use all of these things is really a key enabler to achieving acquisition at the speed of relevance. The Defense Acquisition University, or DAU, is our learning platform at DoD. It connects all 183,000 acquisition professionals in the workforce. It provides classrooms and online learning, on-the-job resources, on-demand content, and acquisition program consulting resources really needed to adapt to the rapidly evolving acquisition environment. DAU is helping us to redefine workforce certification requirements to replace extensive mandatory training at the beginning of a professional's career with a combination of focused career field training and credentials they need to perform in the workplace. With that, I think I'm going to stop talking, and hopefully we can get back into some Q&A. So back to you, Joe.
Ms. Orr, thank you so much for that wonderful overview of all the important work you and your team are doing. Ms. Orr, you mentioned the National Defense Strategy and its line of effort 3, reform the department. That's a pretty tall order, especially for you and your team at A&S. You mentioned like the 5000 series and creative compliance. Are there any other initiatives, or what do you consider your most important reforms initiated under your leadership to date?
A couple of them. One is the fact that we have made acquisition much simpler to understand and use, in terms of, instead of having this big book that you read through and use it like a pilot's checklist, we now have the acquisition process broken into different pieces that can be adapted. Out of all of those pieces, I think the most significant accomplishment is the software pathway. We've basically said our major weapon systems are hardware enabled, but they're software defined, and we need to make sure we continually evolve that software from development to production to sustainment. It's all a continuum, and we actually are really excited to have been able to work with the Hill, with Congress, to define some pathfinder projects for a software color of money, because previously we spent so much time on administrivia, but very important administrivia, to make sure we were legally compliant with colors of money. This is going to be able to unleash our business processes to keep up with technical innovation.
Well, these are pretty tough challenges, but what are the biggest challenges and opportunities going forward for further reform?
I think it's really communicating both with industry to understand middle tier acquisition, how we no longer need clearly defined requirements. We can basically try to define a capability and see the art of the possible, to make sure that industry understands how they can work with contracting professionals to get on contract, and then also to teach our contracting workforce what we have for capability and really unleash them to innovate. I always think that technical innovation is way sexier and easier to do, for all the obvious reasons, than business innovation, because people are afraid they're going to break the law and go to jail or be hauled up in front of the news or get pulled up onto the Hill for a hearing, which can be lots of fun. What we have to do is show that our acquisition professionals, our business professionals, can make a huge difference to the warfighter. No kidding, they can get capability in warfighters' hands much more quickly.
Thank you. So you are our very first Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. When AT&L split off the research and engineering arm. But many argue that maintain our technology edge, it's less about the technology itself and more about the speed in which it can be identified and deployed. And this really underscores the importance of your team's mission. Would you agree with this assessment, and maybe why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we all know that technology is out there, but how do you quickly apply it to the warfighting gaps we have? I work along with my whole team very, very closely with the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hyten. His responsibility through the JROC is to define requirements for the warfighter. My responsibility through our acquisition process is to get it there quickly. And the challenge is this valley of death we have between development of cool technical things and applying them in a way that the warfighter can use them. So we like to work on the art of the possible. How do we get going? How do we enable that technical collaboration to meet the needs of the warfighter?
Thank you. So, Ms. Roy, we're out here in Silicon Valley, the land of the startups. We've got the Defense Innovation Unit down the street where Mike Brown runs, just a great organization. But how would you characterize, how is your organization increasing collaboration between industry and government, especially at the startup and small company level? And is there anything else we can increase this? Thank you.
Well, first of all, it goes without saying, but I will sort of foot stomp it, that most of our innovation comes from small businesses. absolutely vital to us at Department of Defense. So I believe regardless of where you work and what your mission is, everything comes down to communication. So early on, I knew that my industrial policy team, my acquisition team, just me personally, you could only communicate and meet with so many people. So I decided we would use the industry associations as our force multiplier, if you will, to echo and amplify what messages we have, but probably just as importantly, if not more importantly, for us to listen to what industry needs. So what we do is I bring about 15 people, and we're doing this virtually now, just as well as we did it in person, quarterly, working with 3 industry associations. They pull together about 15 or so CEOs. They develop the agenda. I bring our service acquisition leads. I bring a number of A&S individuals, and we talk with industry about what their challenges are, what they're doing. I also bring the big primes in, one company once a month with their senior leadership team, my senior leadership team, again, service acquisition representatives, and we talk about the issues. So I think it comes down to a forum to do this. Now, interestingly enough, during COVID, when Health and Human Services and FEMA tapped DOD on the shoulder saying, we've got a scope and scale we can't deal with to buy PPE, to buy vaccines, whatever it might be, we pulled together a workforce to really help them. We needed to talk to the industrial base about what was going on, that they were essential workers, and we fell right into that infrastructure we had already developed with the industry associations and broadened our collaboration from 3 industry associations to 15, and we literally were able to reach out to millions and millions and millions of companies across the globe. So it's that finding a forum to communicate, but on my team, industrial policy, they're the help desk. So anybody can email, they can write, and we've come up with all kinds of welcome mats to help people get into the right places, which I'm thrilled to be able to shoot some of them your way so you can share them with your class.
Well, thank you. We would love to have a chance to see those, Ms. Lord. Given all the changes in the requirements and how you do your mission with all the recent changes, what's changed in how you're preparing acquisition professionals for these new ways of doing business that you described?
Well, you know, we used to lock them down at the Defense Acquisition University for 2 or 3 weeks and put our finger on the transmit button and lecture in what I'd call like a 30, 40-year-old way. We've changed that. We've been totally virtual since March, but more importantly, we do lots of podcasts. We are, instead of taking the very, what I consider dry policy, we do interviews with the program executive officers, with program managers, and get them to tell stories about the acquisition problems they've had and how they've used some of the authorities we have, because again, I want that creative compliance. People are so worried about doing something wrong that they rather do nothing at all, which isn't helping us. So it's very, very different in terms of a lot of real-time presentations, a lot of podcasts, a lot of self-service type of work. We also actually licensed from TED Talks what we call TEDx DAU. And so we just finished with our 2nd round of TED Talks on defense acquisition, and it's kind of acquisition at the edge. So they do a great job.
TED Talk, we are going to assign some to our class. TA's
there you go. There you go.
This is great. So one more for me, then we'll shift to student questions, Ms. Lord. So I wonder, you know, it's not, we mentioned it's not just the technology, but it's also not just technology, it's also how we use this technology and weapon systems to change our operational concepts and how we fight. Could you maybe comment at all on how the purchase of new weapon systems technologies is coordinated with the development of new doctrine or new operational concepts?
Absolutely. Right now, the NDS tells us that we are pivoting from violent extremist organizations, you know, think Afghanistan, think Iraq, that type of thing, to peer-to-peer threats, some of the types of issues we see in Syria and so forth that we see in around the second island chain with China. So what we have to do is change our warfighting capability. We are working very closely in ANS with the joint staff and the services as we develop that new doctrine. It's something we do on weekly meetings with the SecDef. So dynamic force employment, for instance, where we are putting capability out around the world. We are deploying ships, aircraft that just show up different places a little bit more surprisingly. What we're doing is listening to that voice of the customer, if you will, the warfighter, about what are the electronic warfare capabilities they need, what are the all-domain command and control that they need now that we are truly an interoperable force, whether it be space, air, surface, sea, subsurface, on land. And what we are doing is, again, working closely with the joint staff through the JROC with General Hyten. I sit on the JROC. We define what the needs are, and then we get that voice of the customer and go right into the development. So it's taking that technology and applying it where needed with lots of cycles, lots of iterations back and forth.
Thank you. So switching to student questions, this is from Sammy, a political science major. And he asks, what's the most stark example you can recall of the way acquisition processes have adapted within the DoD, in partnerships with fast-paced private sector companies in Silicon Valley? And how should these processes be further adapted?
Well, I think one of the starkest changes we've made, is that what it was?
Yes, so some examples of how the process have adapted within.
Yeah, I think probably two things. One is having virtual pitch days where the services and OSD are bringing together small companies with different service acquisition representatives and handing out contracts right on the spot, small contracts. And I think there's much, much more of that we can do. My team is actually putting together a digital marketplace where it's kind of like a dating app almost, to bring in a bunch of companies with capabilities. They will put them in there, and they will be vetted to make sure we understand the ownership of those companies, that there's no nefarious adversarial ownership there, and we use the supply chain illumination tools to do that. Then we bring in venture capitalists on the other side, again, make sure we understand the beneficial ownership of that cash coming in, and then let them get together and sort things out and see if there's any interest. Overarching, we have requirements and needs articulated by DoD. So we've done a crawl, walk, run. We've had a couple small events, and just in the next month, we're bringing on this digital marketplace to make it all happen.
So Ms. Lord, acquisitionmatch.com. It's just
there you go. There you go. You got to get in.
So next question. This is Mihir, as a computer science major. And he asked this, do you think Anduril, which is a defense tech startup out here.
Know it well.
So do you think their model, and he describes it, a company develops a product on their own dime and then sells it to the DoD, versus DoD funds the development, giving companies an incentive to stretch out timelines. Is this the future of defense tech procurement?
I think there is very much a place for the Anduril type model, as well as the traditional companies. I think we need a whole spectrum, because typically a company is not going to build an aircraft carrier or a fighter jet or a large satellite on their own. It's just too complex, too cumbersome. But smaller options, I think, are very much what we want to see. We want to see those developments. We want to get them in the hands of the warfighter as soon as possible. That's where we're using other transaction authorities, particularly, to get going on that. That's what DIU does. We're using middle tier of acquisition to rapidly field prototypes and new production. And I was just with Chris Brose from Anduril a couple of weeks ago out at Andrews Air Force Base on a JADC2 day, talking about other ideas they have. What always concerns me is people don't come and talk to us. They think we can't talk to them. We want to hear from these companies, and we will vector you the correct places. So I love that model.
Fantastic. Next question. This is John. He's an international security graduate program major, but his question is this. The defense industrial base is composed of thousands of companies ranging from lean startups of 5 people to established firms of thousands. These companies provide substantial and sometimes rather easy to access targets for foreign adversaries. And his question is, how does the DoD ensure operational security in its acquisitions when there's such a vast range and diversity of corporate contributors to the national security ecosystem?
Yeah, OPSEC, as we call it, is incredibly important. So on one hand, one of my prime focus areas has been cybersecurity of the defense industrial base. That's why we rolled out this CMMC that I said it's like ISO is to quality. It will be for cybersecurity. So that was huge, making sure that the infrastructure of companies are adequately protected. And again, scaling it's different if we buy combat gear, boots or clothing versus if we're buying, a fighter jet. You need a different level of security. But also what we're doing with our new 5000 rewrite, one of the functional areas was cybersecurity. We are writing in cybersecurity standards to how you design new systems. We also spend an enormous amount of time with NSA and Cybercom with exquisite intelligence we get on what adversaries are trying to do to our weapon systems. And we are going back and continuing to harden the already fielded systems. We have new KPPs, if you will, for designing in the cybersecurity of the new systems. And then, of course, we are looking at mergers and acquisitions. I spend quite a bit of my time with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. CFIUS, which was firmed up, if you will, by FIRMA. I won't get into all of it, but bottom line, when there's a national security threat, can block transactions, acquisitions, and now with FIRMA, we can block acquisition of real estate adjacent to critical national security spots, and we can also intervene in JVs.
Well, thank you. Ms. Rose, shifting to a broader question. This is Sarah, an electrical engineering major. A short question, but kind of a big one. And she asks, if we were in a major peer war in 5 years, what would cause us to win or lose from your perspective?
I think it's being ready to fight tonight. And so we always want to not get to war. That's what our nuclear deterrent is about. It's about keeping the peace, both with nuclear and non-nuclear weapons. So it's having that ability to make the stakes way too high to have someone actually wage war on us. That's frankly, although we're war fighters, we're all about not getting to that point. So it's a combination, as the National Defense Strategy says, of readiness and also modernization, because we know as we were fighting wars in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, it was again worried about improvised explosive devices and a bunch of other things. Well, meanwhile, the Russians and the Chinese were developing pretty exquisite capability of a different type. And so we've been playing a bit of catch up. We still have significant overmatch, obviously, but we need to make sure we modernize quickly. And that's why, we're not doing all this acquisition policy revision just because we're kind of a bunch of geeks about contracting law. It's because we know it takes too long to go from concept to actually deploying a system. So we have got to modernize.
Thank you. Well, I know we're getting close on time here. I want to ask kind of another broad question. This is Stanford. This is a class, looking at technology, national security, how we're going to approach, defeating future adversaries and defending U.S. interests. There's some students in our class that aspire to public service, and
yay!
Would love your thoughts and maybe even advice for those that they want to be you someday, for example, and aspire to serve at the highest levels, whether defense or other government agencies. Can you give any thoughts on, advice, recommendations, how they might approach this, and as they leave Stanford, the things they may do to help, move down that path?
Yeah, I was 33 years in industry before coming into government, and I've got to tell you, this government job is by far the most fascinating job I've had. I was very fortunate to do some things in industry that I'm proud of and I think were significant, but there is just so much you can do in government. So on a fundamental level, I would say connect with people. We have rather Byzantine hiring processes. I didn't even know that USA Jobs existed before I came to the federal government, but that's where we advertise all of our jobs. But I think you have to connect with people, and you need to talk about what you're interested in doing. So I will say that I think people should reach out to someone currently in government and talk a little bit about what generally they're interested in, what they would like to do, because you don't know what you don't know, but you've got to start a conversation. I am more than happy to have people email me, and people think, oh, undersecretaries don't read their email. I read it early and often. I might not be able to respond as quickly as I would like, but please reach out and talk to someone, and we can identify people for you to talk to. On a more basic level, I've started a number of industry government exchanges, which in the past have legally been hard to do because the people going back to industry have been so constrained in terms of what they could work on. We've worked around a lot of that with some kind of creative thinking on the legal side. But I would say reach out and talk to people that are in the services, people that work at OSD, people that work at the State Department, Treasury. I will tell you, you're never going to make a lot of money working in government. However, you, particularly at junior levels, will be exposed to so much more than you could be in the same amount of time in industry. And I'd say a 1, 2, 3-year stint would be incredibly enriching for your background, regardless of what you do with the balance of your career. We also, I kind of fantasize about getting people back in for 1 to 2 years that perhaps served for, say, 7 to 10 years, then went out to industry. Like, I would just love to get some logisticians from Southwest or a trucking company or Amazon to come and work with us, because what we do at the Defense Logistics Agency, it's eye-watering. It's just unbelievable. So I'd say communication. Again, those industry associations, National Defense Industrial Association, the Aerospace Industry Association, there are lots of them out there. Talk to them. It's their job to connect industry with government. But I'll tell you, I don't think we talk enough about government service in, I grew up, my father was a lawyer, he served in the Army, World War II, but we never talked about, what it was to serve. And not only is it really incredible to be part of something much bigger than just you, it's amazing how much impact you can have and how much you can see and learn.
Well, thank you, Ms. Lord. You may be seeing some Stanford.edu emails coming your way.
Yeah, bring it on, bring it on.
But you've really been a real inspiration and role model for our students. And just thank you for making time for us. And thank you for all you and your team do for all of us with your important mission. And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Joe. I appreciate it. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.